little while about why you should read Ecclesiastes. Now, if you look online, if you go on YouTube, there's a whole bunch of videos that start out why you should read, and then it has the name of a book or an author. So, why you should read Dickens, there's one video like that. Why you should read Moby Dick, there's another one like that. And so on. There's actually quite a few. If you looked, you would see them. So I want to do for you why you should read Ecclesiastes. And like I said, I think that the Lord has been leading me, in my heart at least, to teach someone about the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll see if that happens. But even if I don't get that opportunity to go further in the book and teach about it, at the very least, I hope this will convince you that you should go home and read the book yourself. I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you should read Ecclesiastes. Number 1, it's fun to play detective. Everybody likes to watch detective shows on TV, figure out mysteries.
Yes.
Well, Ecclesiastes is filled with mysteries to figure out. And you have to play detective to find out what in the world it's talking about. Now, when you do, it's really profound and really life-changing. But it's not easy to understand when you first look at it. Because it's a book that's written in a very unusual style. It's even sometimes put together with other books of poetry, like the Psalms. It's sometimes called a poetic book because it contains many poems and many figures of speech that are very difficult to understand unless you play detective and figure out the meaning. Now, here's an example for you just from the 2nd chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. One verse says in there, "So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. So why was I then more wise?" So maybe that's happened to you. You see that the foolish people, they have bad things happen to them, and we're not nearly as foolish as they are, but the same bad stuff happens to us. So he says, why was I then wise? What's the good in being wise? Or wiser than someone else, or wiser than a fool, when the same bad stuff happens to me that happens to the fool. And you read that and you think, what's the matter? Does the person who's writing this book not believe in God? Does he really think it's not better to be wise than it is to be foolish? What's going on there? Okay, here's a verse just a little bit later in Ecclesiastes 2. It says, "Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor." So that sounds a lot like later on when Jesus says the wicked people say, "Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." It basically sounds the same. There's nothing better for a man than he should eat and drink. So is that the right way to view life? And especially we ask that question because it sounds like a bad thing. Eat, drink, and be merry. As if you're living a life of pleasure or hedonism, as the big word goes.
We actually have that verse in our kitchen.
Oh, in your kitchen. Okay, so you guys might be better understanding the passage than other people do. For instance, Kanye West put out this amazing album called Jesus is King, where he went from singing about all sorts of bad things to praising Jesus. Amazing event in our culture. And it's a very, very good album, by the way. And a lot of Christians started talking about what's good and bad about the album. Is there anything bad about the album? Because they expected to find something bad in an album by Kanye West about Jesus. And there was one part of the album that many of the reviews, by Christians especially, said, this is not good. Everything else they said is good, and they were right. Personally, the only part of the album I am a little concerned about was where he says, "What have you been hearing from the Christians? They'll be the first ones to judge me." I don't like that too much because it kind of sets up that if he does something wrong, then people are judging him improperly to point out where he's wrong. But other than that, that's not a big problem. I don't personally see any problem in any of the lyrics of the album, which is, and I'm very critical when it comes to things about the Bible or Jesus. So it's really a good album. I actually recommend it. But there's one part that most Christians said was not good in the album, and here's what it says. It says, in one of the songs called Everything We Need, it says, switch your attitude, go ahead, level up yourself, this, that, different latitude. Life too short, go spoil yourself, feel that feel, enjoy yourself, because we have everything we need. And so some Christians said, oh, that sounds like the old Kanye. He's saying just have fun in life. But you know what? These words are actually the same words that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes. And when you understand them correctly, they're actually very biblical. Because the book of Ecclesiastes, as someone already said, the main theme of the book is that nothing is worthwhile without God. That's why you hear vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Or meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless, depending on the translation. That's the main theme of Ecclesiastes. But there's a secondary theme in Ecclesiastes that pops up all throughout the book. And that is, anything with God is great. And we should enjoy it. And so really, these words, like the verse I read you and this verse in the Kanye West song, actually reflect that important theme. That with God, this life can be full of wonderful, enjoyable, pleasurable things. And we should thank God for the things we enjoy. Now, if you read the book and you understand that those are the main themes, you will understand a lot more of the book than you will otherwise. All right, that's one reason you should read Ecclesiastes, because it's fun to play detective and figure out what it means. Okay, number 2. There is great historic significance to the book of Ecclesiastes. Some of you may like history. I think most people like it if it's interesting history. And Ecclesiastes is very significant historically. I believe that the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes was King Solomon, who was one of the greatest kings in all of history. But now listen to this. Here's what makes it so interesting. We know from the book of Kings, that was already mentioned, that Solomon, though he started out really well and was given this amazing gift of wisdom by God, there's a story where he says, I'm young, I don't know how to lead your great people. God, could you please give me wisdom? That's what I need more than anything. And God says, because you didn't ask for riches and power and fame, but you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you more wisdom than anybody's ever had. And I'll give you the other stuff too, he says. But I'm going to give you more wisdom than anyone's ever had. So Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived up until that point. And maybe who ever lived, period, except for Jesus. So here he is, this greatest king in the history of Israel. And he's the wisest man who ever lived. But watch this. He went bad. He took a whole bunch of wives that he shouldn't have taken. Like 1,000 of them.
What do you mean take?
Well, he had more than one wife. Lots of wives. And then he had other women too that he had relationships with. So that was a way that he turned away from God, and that those relationships made him even worse spiritually. So he went downhill and brought judgment upon the people of God in Israel because of his sins. But at the very end of his life, he repented of his sins. And he wrote this book of Ecclesiastes. So here you have the wisest man in the history of the world, who is even wiser now because he made terrible mistakes and learned from them. And so he writes this book at the end of his life. It's his swan song. It's his famous last words, telling us all the wisdom God gave him and the wisdom of his experience. That's another reason you should read the book. Number 3, why you should read Ecclesiastes. It has great literary significance. Meaning it's a very amazing book of literature. There's a famous American novelist named Thomas Wolfe who graduated with a master's degree from Harvard and wrote some famous books. Listen to what he said about the book of Ecclesiastes. He said, For of all I have ever seen or learned, this book, Ecclesiastes, seems to me the noblest, the wisest, and the most powerful expression of man's life upon this earth, and also the highest flower of poetry, eloquence, and truth. I am not given to dogmatic judgments in the matter of literary creation, but if I had to make one, I could say that Ecclesiastes is the greatest single piece of writing I have ever known. Oh, this man, by the way, is not a Christian. I should have mentioned that in the beginning. Yet he says this about Ecclesiastes. It's the greatest single piece of writing I have ever known, and the wisdom expressed in it is the most lasting and profound. So Ecclesiastes is a great and classic work of literature. One of the greatest ever. And even non-Christian scholars and artists can recognize that. It's of such literary significance that even many popular artists have stolen content from the book of Ecclesiastes to put into their art and then to sell millions and millions of dollars worth of material. For instance, there's a rock group named Pink Floyd who had an album called The Dark Side of the Moon. And this album that they made in 1974 stayed on the charts, the music charts, longer than any album in history. So suffice to say, it has made hundreds of millions of dollars for this band and has been listened to by hundreds of millions of people over and over and over again. Well, did you know that The Dark Side of the Moon, arguably the most famous album ever in rock music, the lyrics are actually taken from the book of Ecclesiastes. Listen to the words of the one song, Time. And all these words you will see if you read the book of Ecclesiastes. Ticking away the moments that make up a dull day. We fritter and waste the hours in an offhand way. Kicking around on a piece of ground in your hometown, waiting for someone or something to show you the way. Tired of lying in the sunshine, staying home to watch the rain, and you are young and life is long and there is time to kill today. And then one day you find 10 years have got behind you, no one told you when to run, you missed the starting gun. So you run and you run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking, racing around to come up behind you again. The sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older, shorter of breath, and one day closer to death. Every year is getting shorter, never seem to find the time. Plans that either come to naught or half a page of scribbled lines. Hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. The time is gone, the song is over, thought I'd something more to say. Every line in that lyric I just read you is actually from the book of Ecclesiastes. A guy named Roger Waters, who wrote the songs for Pink Floyd, was smart enough to know, I'm not that good. So what I'll do is I'll take these words from Ecclesiastes, and it became the most famous album of all time. No coincidence there.
Do you think that is good that he copied, or is bad?
I think it's good if we enjoy it with God. You know, as a Christian, if we enjoy it and learn from the truth of the words.
You mean
it's
like,
not good.
Like plagiarism?
You mean plagiarism? They stole it? Yeah, they didn't break any law because Ecclesiastes can be used by anybody legally. But, yeah. I don't think it's good that he was just trying to make money. And I wish that he would believe the words that he wrote down on that album. He hasn't yet. We can pray for him. But I know I do, and I'm thrilled to hear it. So, the book of Ecclesiastes is just a really, really great and famous book. That alone is a reason to read it. Okay, number 4. The book of Ecclesiastes has great philosophical significance. I mean, philosophy meaning like the meaning of life and how to understand the world. And we already mentioned this, that the book of Ecclesiastes tells us, as directly as anything in the Bible, it tells us what the meaning of life is. It gives us a worldview, a way to understand everything that goes on around us and even in us. It's has great philosophical significance. And last one, it has great practical significance. It talks about the purpose of life. What can be more practical than that? It talks about the plan God has for us, and when we make plans, how that relates to God's plan. It talks about money. It talks about health, relationships. It talks about, for a whole chapter, the fool. What a fool is and how we can avoid being a fool. Because what terrible things happen to a fool. It talks about youth and aging. It talks about, in one of my favorite chapters, dreams and goals that we have for our life. In Ecclesiastes chapter 11, Solomon says some words that are a lot like another popular song. And I quote various songs for you, really to reflect the book of Ecclesiastes, because it is very poetic. It is like the work of an artist, a great artist, producing it. But there's a song by Kool and the Gang called Get Down on It. Has anybody ever heard that song? It's really catchy. It's really catchy. But the words of this song are basically similar to what Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes, but in a modern, funky way. It says, how are you going to do it if you really don't want to dance? By standing on the wall. Get your back up off the wall. Because I heard all the people say, get down on it. Get down on it. Get down on it. You know, that song, I'm not sure exactly what the writer of the song meant, but the way I take it is, stop standing around. And, the dancing is a metaphor for life, like a lot of songs are. Get your back up off the wall, If you want something to happen, you got to step out, and you got to go for it. If you want your dreams to come true, go for it. That's actually what Solomon writes in the penultimate climactic chapter of Ecclesiastes 11. He says it in this way: cast your bread upon the waters, because you don't know that it might come back to you. There may be great fruit, there may be great reward, there may be great dreams that come true if you will simply go for it. Get your back up off the wall. Right. Get down on it. Yeah. So this is the kind of stuff we have in this book. And, not only does it have all these practical things, but it has a great conclusion. Unlike many books, I am frustrated. So often I'll get a novel at the library. It'll get me interested. I'll read it, and I'll get to the end, and I'll think, well, it just ended. Why didn't they think of a good ending for this story? But Ecclesiastes has one of the greatest endings ever. Because after weaving through all these themes in these amazing poetic and literary ways that make you wonder what it means and catch your attention and raise all these questions in your mind, then you get to the end and they all come together. All the threads come together in this powerful conclusion.